It's Gone Sideways.
Cool. All right, well, let's get into it. So, Rob, thanks so much for coming on. I guess this all came about because I put a call out on social media looking for more talent for the show, just for people to share their stories, and you sent me an email with just a little bit of a snippet of your story, and it just sounded so fascinating, so I wanted to just get you in and hear about it. So, where should we begin your wild story?
I'm a little bit put off because you said you were looking for talent. Yeah, you've missed out on talent here, but there is one hell of a story because I think, as I said, when we come up in the elevator, I feel like an imposter because I didn't ever feel sick. So my memoirs, if I write them, are going to be called "I Didn't Feel Sick the Day I Nearly Died." So roll back to 26th of March, 2022.
Yep.
And my wife said to me, Rob, you should go, 2021. My wife said, you should go and see a doctor because you haven't seen a doctor since our son was born. He's about to turn 21. So I went to see a brand new medical centre set up in Crow's Nest, walked in hoping maybe to get an appointment in 2 weeks' time.
But your wife had just thought it would be good because of I wanted a checkup.
Yeah, look, I didn't feel sick.
Yeah.
What
was prompting her to make you want to go to?
Well, as I said, our son was about to turn 21, and literally the only time I'd ever been to a hospital or a doctor is breaking a bone. It was broken legs, broken fingers, or actually I did get smashed in the face by a cricket ball playing for Sydney University.
Yeah.
And had to have my lip stitched, but it was always emergency based.
Yep.
So it had never been just to go, what's your blood pressure? Let's do some blood tests, see what your sugar levels are at. Didn't know what cholesterol was.
Yep.
Hated doctors.
Yep.
And so she said, go and see the doctor. So I went hoping to get an appointment maybe 2 or 3 weeks after I'd gone in and said, I want to make an appointment. The receptionist said, take a seat. There'll be a doctor with you shortly, which caught me by surprise. So I sat down, waited. The doctor came out and he said, as he got about 3 metres away from me, he said, Rob Manning? I said, yes. He said, you're a very sick man. So
that would do my head in. Like, just a guy has looked at you. He's never seen you before in his life. He's seen you for 3 seconds, and he says you're a very sick man without having to do any tests.
Exactly, Andrew. So
like, wow, I didn't realise.
I shook his hand and said, "Nice to meet you too, Doc."
Yeah, right. Like, I didn't realise I looked like such a piece of shit that
I've got a photo, and I actually thought I looked really good in the photo. My son's got an MX-5 convertible. My wife and she actually picked me up from work. And she drove me across the Harbour Bridge in the MX-5 convertible, and I'm taking selfies of me and the bridge in the background, and I look happy, healthy, and we're on the way to the doctor.
But a doctor would look at you and say, you're a very sick man.
Well, and he said, why the fat tummy and that yellow spot in your eye? And I said, well, I probably eat too much, drink too much, and don't exercise enough. And he goes, no, there's something wrong with you. Why are you here to see me? I said, well, because my wife told me that I had to see a doctor. I haven't seen a doctor in nearly 20 years. And, so that's why I'm here. He said, well, I want to do some tests. So we hadn't even sat down and had a consultation, didn't take my blood pressure or anything like that, sent me straight down to the treatment room, 6 vials of blood. He wrote a script to get an MRI and then an ultrasound. So I had those tests. Text came through on Monday morning. Ring the surgery, your results are in. So I rang the surgery and said, can I speak to Dr. Soleimani? And the receptionist put me straight through. The doctor said, Rob, I need to see you. I said, great. I can see you on Thursday because I'm in Melbourne tomorrow and Wednesday for work. And he said, you're not listening. I need to see you.
Yeah, this is a scenario where it's just like when you can fit me in.
Shit goes sideways.
Get your ass here now.
Yeah, shit had gone sideways at that stage because he said, pack a bag, I'm taking you to Royal North Shore Hospital. So
how did that make you feel? Were you just shitting yourself?
Yeah, because he hasn't told me what's wrong with me.
Yeah.
He's already told me I'm sick. 6 vials of blood, people poking and prodding and you're in a machine.
When they say pack a bag, that's never a good sign, right?
Well, you're not coming home that day.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until about 11:30 that night that one of the young doctors said, you know what, if you come in tomorrow, being the Tuesday, he said, you probably wouldn't be going home. The toxin levels in your blood are so high that you are hours away from having a massive catastrophic organ failure.
And yet you felt fine.
Felt fine. At 54, I thought any of the aches and pains I was experiencing were just down to age.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, it makes you think if that's how you felt, you thought you were fine when you were sick, imagine how good you could feel.
Yeah, well, so shit goes sideways. And I think when you were looking for talent, as you loosely use the word, you looked at how people cope with that and then how they get their life back on track.
Yeah.
And so I thought I'd led a pretty charmed life. You know, at 25, I was a general manager of a company which was a global company. I had a staff of 82. I then went through the ranks of corporations like the Vodafone Corporation, Telstra Corporation. I'd run my own businesses. I'd worked for WPP in the advertising side of things. And you know, working for big corporations, I then thought, well, you know, if these people can make lots of money doing stuff, I can do that. So I set up my own advertising company.
Yep.
Did that for a couple of years and ended up in digital media and had a company at one stage, Andrew. If we go back a few years, and people who will listen to this will look up who I am, but at one stage I was going to be one of the next Atlassian type billionaires. I had a company which was founded in Australia, bought by Americans. They recruited me in 2014, and I was the VP of business development for Asia Pacific. In January, they retrenched me, and rather than get retrenched, I thought, you know what, I'll make an offer. So I said, look, you know, if you guys are shutting the Australian office down and getting rid of me, why don't I just buy the company off you? So I did. I bought the company off them, and then for the next 2 years ran that and was about to go through a massive investment round, which valued the company at $500 million. Wow. And myself and one other bloke owned the shares, so we were worth about $250 million each on paper.
Wow.
And then a whole heap of things happened in China where Xi Jinping decided that Hong Kong was going to go back under his control early. He shut down all the financing and said no one can take any more than $50,000 of US out of China at any one time, so out of Hong Kong. And our money, which was about $100 million coming out of Hong Kong, disappeared.
Fuck.
And with that, all the hopes and dreams, which in some ways, as shit goes sideways, shit went sideways then.
So how long ago was that?
2016.
Yeah, okay.
2017. In 2016, my wife and I missed out on a property in Mossman at $20.1 million because we were beaten by $60,000 by a Chinese national. And he beat us just before the money came out. So he got the property, which was good, because we didn't, because we couldn't afford it.
Yeah, by 60,000.
No, actually by about 21.6
Right.
million, because the money I was about to spend.
Oh, yeah, you didn't have. Okay.
Didn't have.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm with you. Yes.
But
Right.
had he not come in, I would have been faced with
Stuck with a property you couldn't buy.
yeah, so shit's gone sideways very early on in that part of the story. But yeah, as I said, charmed life, breezing along, and then, yeah, you get a sudden wake-up call when doctor says you're going into hospital for 2 weeks.
So you packed your bags, you headed in, and then what happened?
Poked and prodded for a few hours on the Monday night and told, you know, if I'd come in on Tuesday, I probably would have died. And I actually made a recording on my phone the next morning, and it was started my memoirs. I didn't feel sick the day I nearly died. Because
So it was just you recording your thoughts?
Yeah, because I got told how close I'd come to dying. I didn't know how sick I was because I continued to be in that denial. The frog in boiling water scenario is what I call it, Andrew. You're like, you go along, and as I said, aches and pains you put down to old age. I was still playing cricket. I'd only finished playing football at age 48, Aussie rules.
Yep.
So I'd sort of led a fairly fit life, and I didn't ever see myself as a heavy drinker. I went through a bit of a patch when my dad died in 2016, and then the business all went south. So 16, 17, 18, I was living a bit of a high life, hit a low point when business, the funding didn't come through, and probably drank 2 bottles of wine a night, which was, I didn't think a lot.
Yep.
But as we unroll this, you'll find that, you know, some people's livers repair themselves. I had an autoimmune condition that meant that every drink I had was basically a scar on the liver that was never going to repair.
Just incremental damage.
Yeah. So you hear of liver cleansing diets.
I mean, 2 bottles does seem...
Oh, no, it is.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
But in context, there was a lot of belief it was self-medication. It was trying to stop the voices in their head and the depression. And, the period of 2 to 3 years of drinking that level didn't help the situation. But as one doctor said to me, you could have had one drink or 1,000 drinks. This was always going to happen to you, because it wasn't just affecting my liver, it was affecting my heart and my kidney. So I ended up last year having 4 stents put into my heart with a couple of heart surgeries. And as the story goes, 2 weeks in hospital, got out of the hospital during that 2-week stint to celebrate my son's 21st birthday, and then to open the Crow's Nest Comedy Club.
Yep.
And then went back into hospital at the end of those 2, got checked out, and it was a series, as I said, of weekly appointments back to see the liver specialist. And then in July last year, so July 2022, getting told, if we can't find a liver for you by July 21, if we can't find a liver for you by the middle of next year, you'll be dead.
Yeah, fuck. And did they tell you at that stage what the likelihood would be that they could find a liver? Like, how many of them are there floating around that could be available?
Last year, for example, there were 460 people who got liver transplants.
Okay.
Yeah, or organ transplants, actually. But liver, there was 60. So there aren't a lot, right? So finding a liver when you need it, and shit has gone sideways here when you learn that.
Is the demand much higher than the supply?
Yeah, definitely,
okay.
Definitely. And we'll come to, because that's part of the end of what I want this story to be. Mm-hmm. But for me, finding out that you're going to die is a big thing, because my son, as I said, had just turned 21, and my wife and I had been married for 25 years, and I didn't expect my life to be told it was going to end within 12 months if they couldn't find me a liver. And if you'd asked me what I knew about organ transplant at that point in time, I knew I was a registered donor, and I knew I needed a new liver. That's it.
Yeah, that's about, I think, what a lot of people would know.
Yeah.
Right? It's very limited. A lot of people have ticked that on their license that they would donate.
Yep. And then you forget about it. And in a way, that's the way it should be. But what you've got to go through to get one, and then what you've got to do to keep it in, and that's the thing. Whether it's people who have got diabetes and need kidney transplants, or people with cystic fibrosis who need heart and lung transplants, the number of people who die every year in Australia is about 80,000 people die in hospitals. Of that, about 2,000 people are eligible to become organ donors, and then of that, you're down to about 700 whose families say yes, or who are eligible to donate based on their lifestyle, their age, those sort of things. So to get an organ, the transplant waiting lists can be years. There are people who are on waiting lists for years.
And they can die in that time.
Yeah, and they do.
A lot of them, yeah. So how did you feel when you're told that, and your own mortality is just staring you in the face, right? It must must be a tough pill to swallow. What were the emotions that kind of went through your head straight away?
The first one is denial.
Yeah,
definitely. As I said, it's a frog in boiling water. I didn't feel sick, and it's not now until I listened back to the audio of one of the meetings we had with one of the doctors, where I sounded like Sylvester Stallone in his movie where he's come out of the ring with Apollo Creed. He's knocked Apollo to the ground and he's calling out for Adrian. I sounded, when I was talking, it was pretty much like it, because there's a thing called, it's called HE. It's a condition where the toxins in your brain give you brain damage. And so I sounded punch drunk.
Wow.
Not able to put a sentence together. And so...
But you weren't even aware of that at the time, not until you listened back to it.
As I said, frog in boiling water. And for some of it, it sounded like I was drunk, but I hadn't had a drink for over a year. And so when you get told you're going to die, you everything you hear about bucket lists kick in. So, as I said, at 54, I didn't expect to be given a terminal date. So I went out and bought a Mustang.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
What else?
66 convertible, left-hand drive.
Yeah. What else?
I bought a boat.
Nice.
We bought a property up in the Central Coast, which was going to be my forever dying home. That was where I was going to go to die. And I'd started to, as I said, there was denial and then there was acceptance. But the acceptance was, I don't know how I could live with somebody's body part in me. So for me, one of the biggest things to come to grips with was your liver is fucked up.
Mm.
Someone is going to die
Mm.
and you're going to get their liver.
Yeah.
And that was a really hard thing to come to grips with, Andrew. It was,
Why? I don't think
You've got a
I don't
piece-
think I give a fuck. What?
you got a piece of somebody else inside of you
Yeah.
and they've got to die.
Yes.
And so, as I said, my understanding of organ and tissue donation was that when you die, you give your parts away. But when you're on the receiving end of it, it's that whole thing of, I think there's an episode of The Simpsons where Snake, the villain in The Simpsons, he dies and his hair gets transplanted onto Homer.
Homer, yeah.
And Homer becomes a bank robber,
Yep.
or he becomes a thief. And so there's the myth of, am I going to take on someone else's traits? What was their life like? Do I have to emulate them?
Sure.
And so it is a really tough concept that you're going to be alive because someone else is dead, and part of that person is in you.
Sure.
And if it wasn't for really good counselling,
I mean, I guess I could make peace with it because it's like they're not dying to save me. They've just, it's two separate pieces of the puzzle, right?
and I wish we'd met before, because that's exactly what my counsellor said.
Yeah.
Right? Because the great thing about the health system is I was given people to help me through this. So I had a bloke, Christopher, who said, Rob, it's not as if you walk down the street and go, I'll have that one.
Give me Olivia, motherfucker.
Exactly. Right? You can't go and pick, hey, he's 6'4" and fucking full of muscles.
Yeah.
You get what you get if you're lucky enough to get it.
Yes.
And so I started researching, and the one thing that gave me the eclectic life I have is this desire to learn. Every day I wake up, I want to learn something new. And I was once told that a coward is someone who doesn't take risks. And I've never wanted to be a coward, so I always push anything out to as far as it'll go until it breaks, and that's when shit goes sideways, right? The further you push it out, the more likely it's going to fall away.
Yep.
And as long as you have the belief in yourself that the sun comes up in the east and sets in the west, and you want to see as many of those as you can get through most anything. And that's that. So when you've got to come to grips with that, somebody's not dying to save you; they're dead.
Yep.
That's when you start to do your research. I did my research after Chris had said that to me, and as I said, if I'd met you, you would have said the same thing. Like, get over yourself, you fucking princess. If you want to live and see your family grow up and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, make peace with it.
Make peace with it. And so it did. And it took a little while, but as soon as I'd come to grips with that, I then basically went into hospital just before Christmas last year. So I was on the beginning of December, went to Royal North Shore to get the ascites tapped. So you end up, when your liver fails, you bloat, which is why I had the fat tummy. Went in for what I thought was going to be a day. And then they said, look, your blood work's not good. We're going to ship you across to Royal Prince Alfred. So from the 1st to the 16th of December, I was in Royal Prince Alfred, got out on the 16th, went home, and then on the 19th, woke up. My back was in severe pain. Said to my wife, I feel strange. I don't know what it is, but I don't feel myself. And then she said, well, I'm going to go and fill up the car with petrol, and we're going to drive back to Sydney because we're up on the Central Coast. She got back, and I was standing in the front door of the new home that we just bought, naked, not able to put a sentence together. And she said, I'm calling an ambulance. And I remember one of the nurses saying, Claire, if Rob goes downhill, he'll go downhill quickly. And if he does, don't call an ambulance, because where you are, they'll take him to Gosford or Wang Hospital, and nothing against those hospitals, but he'll die. because they're going to have to work out what's wrong with him before they can treat him.
And they already know all your stuff.
You get him here as fast as you can, and we'll take over from there.
Yeah.
So Claire's bundled me into the car. I'm sitting in the back seat, crushing the dog. She's saying, get out of the back seat and into the front seat. Did you shut the front door? I said, no. So I sat in the front seat, and then I started to try and shut the front door from inside the car because I was completely delirious.
Yeah.
She drove door to door in just over an hour and 20 minutes. Checked me in through...
Pretty good effort.
Yeah. Good thing is there was no speeding fine in the mail when we got home. But she got me to RPA, and they triaged in the car park. It was about 36 degrees that day, late Sydney afternoon storm. Temperature dropped to about 28. I was feeling extremely cold, delirious, but not able to form a sentence. So she had to stay and check me in. And then the last thing I remember was her saying, he needs to be looked at before the lady who's got the sprained ankle. Can you please come and see my husband because he's in trouble? And then apparently they put me into a wheelchair and wheeled me through the front doors of the RPA. And about then, the Truman Show kicked in. If you've ever seen the Jim Carrey movie, The Truman Show, where he comes out of his door every morning, good morning, how are you?
Yeah. And he thinks his life is a TV show.
Yeah, well, at that moment, I was chatting to the doctors. I was telling him, my name's Rob James Bartholomew Manning. I was born on this date, and I'm here to get a liver transplant, and everything's cool. But I was actually in a coma.
Oh, this is just something you've imagined.
Everything that happened after about 5:30 on the 19th of December, and there's a whole heap of stuff that we'll go through, was, this thing that happened in my mind because she left me and then she thought she was never going to see me again because I went into a coma. She didn't know that. She saw me in the wheelchair going into the doors. They got me to the ward, and then within 20 minutes they had me in ICU because basically the toxins in the brain had gone to the point where I couldn't think to breathe for myself. So I was on intubation, dialysis, and in intensive care. She only found out on the Monday when she rang me and my phone wouldn't answer. And then she rang the hospital and I said, well, we had to take him to an intensive care bed last night. We're going to monitor him, but we'll keep you informed. COVID had kicked in, so the hospital was in shutdown. She decided that she'd grab our son, who we were living in Crow's Nest at the time, but had the house that we just bought in Central Coast, and they packed up and went up to Central Coast and said, well, we don't know what's going to happen. We can't go and see him anyway. So we'll just stay in touch by phone. And then she found out on Monday I was in a coma. Likelihood of survival wasn't high. On the 29th of December, she came in and picked up my personal effects.
And at that point, I mean, you'd told they needed to find you an organ, a liver by July. And it's December.
Yeah, well,
so had there been a liver identified at that point?
Nope.
No. And you're in a coma.
Well, what had happened, as I said, I went in for what I thought was a routine checkup and a bit of a oil change, and ended up in the hospital for 2 weeks. Checked out on the Friday. Now this is a Sunday night, but one of the last conversations we had with the doctor is, I'll see you after Christmas. Can we make it after February, because wife and I have been married for 25 years. She's about to turn 50. March, April would be good next year if we could sort of fit it in then.
So funny trying to play with God a bit right there, right, isn't it? It's like, look, if I could just squeeze in my transplant then, that would be really good for my schedule.
It'd be nice. It'd be nice to spend Christmas, New Year, get some of these birthday things and anniversaries out of the way, and then towards the middle of next year,
my body's totally crashing.
Just a couple of months before the deadline, right? So let's push.
When you get to the point where you're in a coma, like what if there's not an organ found? Then what are the chances? Like,
well, as I said,
how fucked were you?
On the 29th? So I'd been in a coma for 10 days. She came and picked up my watch, my phone, my keys, my Medicare card, license, the whole bit. And it was given to her in one of those dangerous items bags, the ones with the nuclear symbol on it, telling you that and she then got a phone call that afternoon and said, Claire, we think we've found a liver for Rob. We took him off his heart medication about a week ago. And she said that would have been nice to know. because she hadn't been able to find out any news.
Yeah.
So Thursday night, they've rung up and said, yeah, we think we've got a liver. Friday morning, they operated. The first operation went for 13 hours and used 32 pints of blood or 32 units of blood. And then so that's the 30th of December now.
When you're on the wait list, right, if you suddenly are in a coma, do you get moved up the wait list because it's like it's really dire now? It's like it's gotten to the point where it's like it's do or die?
So we've just gone from shit has gone sideways to Mythbusters. We're about to bust a myth. There is no waiting list.
Oh, what? Okay.
It's based on need. So
okay.
The sad part is doctors use. I'll be very positive towards the medical system here in Australia, but I'll also be a little bit critical of the fact that there's this myth going around that there's a list and you get moved up the waiting list.
Yeah.
It is purely based on need, and for me to get what I got is a true miracle. So I said it right at the start. I feel like a bit of an imposter because I didn't feel sick. I got sick quickly. Catastrophic failure. So for me to get the treatment I got, I needed everything to go right miraculously because everything had gone wrong catastrophically.
Yeah.
So when my liver had failed, you've got an organ about the size of a football that then stops working and puts all the pressure on two smaller organs, which are your kidneys, to get rid of all the toxins in your body. So you get a football going into two cricket balls and things can go south real quick. So it was attacking my heart, my liver and my kidneys, and that's what put me into the coma. If a liver wasn't found, as it was on the 29th of December, I probably wouldn't have made New Year.
And so it's based on need. So you needed for your health to crash further for you to be prioritized. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Because I suppose this is where I think a lot of the myths are that if you make yourself an organ donor, people think, oh, the doctors won't try and save you. What I know is doctors will do whatever they can to save a life. Mm-hmm. And so in my situation, the catastrophic failure of my organs that put me into the coma and then into the best treatment possible at the time meant that they were going to do whatever they could to save me. So when they identified another person whose journey had come to an end, they had to consult with the family of that person and say either they were an organ donor or they're not an registered organ donor, but they do have an organ that we can use to save someone else's life. Will you give consent? And that happened. And at that moment when it happened, my life was saved. When we went back and saw the doctor a few months later, he said, I had to make a call then and there because there was somebody else who was sick, who had potentially prioritised above you. But when your health deteriorated as quickly as it did, the liver you've got is an O-type liver. You're an A+. So being an A positive, we had to use a universal liver to save your life. So the liver I've got is a mismatch, but miraculously it's working better than one that was probably...
Than the original, right?
Yeah, or definitely better than the original. But
yeah.
So that's why I feel like because since then I've done a heap of work and I've met so many people who have had their shit gone sideways with kidney failure or liver failure or heart and lungs, and they'll tell you the story of being on the waiting list, and it's only when you find out that it's only when they get sicker that they get better, because they're not. If there's somebody who is in more need than you, then they'll get it.
Yeah. And
thankfully, when the person's journey ended, I was the one who was in most need.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's quite a complicated system to figure out, what's fair, isn't it? To be
and so we go back to the original part of, and now I know a lot more about it. It actually makes it so much more special or miraculous that I got what I got.
Yeah.
And the thought of someone else's journey coming to an end and then that happening at exactly the moment it did, and me being in exactly the right place because of whatever the decisions were, it shows me that there's something more to this. So I mentioned before about going into the coma and the Truman Show starting.
Mm.
Part of the very clear recollections of the coma are a visit from my dad.
So how long were you in the coma for?
So from the 19th
Yep.
to the 2nd of January.
Okay.
And the 2nd of January is 3 days after the surgery was
So what's that,
completed.
like about 2 weeks?
We worked out that from the, it's basically the 19th to the 31st, which is when surgery is done, is 12 days, and then 14 days to the waking up. When I was in the coma, as I said, there was chatting to the doctors and the nurses, conversations with my wife, which turned out to be I was doing nothing more than listening to her on the phone as I put it next to my ear, and the nurse telling my wife that, yes, he's moved his eyelids or he's squeezed my finger.
Wow.
But my dad came and visited. Now, he's been dead for 6 years at this point. And he looks at me, we're having a chat, not dissimilar to what we're doing now, Andrew. And he said, Rob, when you get out of this and you will, you've got a job to do. You're not 6 foot tall and bulletproof like you thought you were. You should have gone and saw the doctor a lot sooner. So when you get out of here...
from your dad in your coma dream.
It's so much like he was in real life, though.
Yeah.
It felt real, and the message resonated so strongly that throughout the coma, it's sort of what drove me, because he said, you're not 6 foot tall and bulletproof like you thought you were, and when you get out of this and you will, you've got a job to do. You've got to go and tell people to see their doctor sooner. If you'd seen your doctor earlier, you wouldn't be in this situation now. You've got to go and see the politicians and tell them they've got to change the laws around organ and tissue donation. And I said, who do I go and speak to? And he said, you're a smart kid, you'll work it out. So, as I said, you're going to get out of this. Now, I'll see you when you're next coming up my way. And so I can only work out
and
that I must have been pretty...
into a puff of smoke. Where did he just walk out the door?
The conversation, how we got there and how we left, I'm not sure. But the conversation was as real as you and I are talking now. And the message was strong. It was...
Yeah.
Don't be a bloody idiot. Go and see your doctor. The only good thing that can happen from a doctor is he tells you you're going to die and he can help you stop that from happening sooner than it needs to.
Yeah, and that seems pretty useful. Right?
I don't know why blokes, especially, I know you're a bit younger than me. You're about 20 years younger than me. But blokes in my sort of that 50 to 60 age group, I think we're called Gen Xers. Some of us get called boomers. But we tend to think we are 6 foot tall and bulletproof, right? We were told as kids, just suck it up, drink a cup of cement, and you'll be right.
Yeah, I think it's also that kind of, it's been like a traditional blokey mentality, right? Like that, as you said, just to shrug it off. Like, I don't need to go see a doctor, I'm fine. Like, just man up, all that kind of stuff.
Well, as I said, I played Aussie rules until I was 48, 49. Played cricket in January of the year I got sick. So at age 53, 54, I was still playing cricket. And I just figured that as you got older, you got fatter, which was happening. So it's like, yeah, that's old age. That happens.
Yeah. And the aches and pains and stuff.
That's old age. Yeah. Right? So it was the frog in boiling water. And if you didn't feel well, you still went to work. Like, I think in my entire 30-year career, I had maybe 6, 7 sick days, and that was when I got Ross River fever and from water skiing, and was laid, at 23, laid up.
So you've always known yourself to be durable.
Right? Yeah, well, that's just get up and keep. What was the old codral? Soldier on, right? You just get up and do it, right?
Yeah.
If you hit adversity, find a way around it. Sun comes up, sun goes down. You've got to keep going, and I think there's. Yeah, people will look at your background, whether you come from privilege or whether you come from adversity or whatever, and they take you for the moment that they know you, and they make assumptions on it. And the reality is a lot of us keep secrets, and most of the secrets we keep are about ourselves. So you don't talk about the aches and pains because otherwise you're a fucking wuss.
Yep.
Right? The more you can, we're seeing it now with all the work. It's no one wants to hear anyone complain.
Yeah.
You always want to hear... Yeah, how you doing, Andrew?
Doing well.
Fucking great, mate.
Yeah.
How are you? Yeah, I'm fucking all right too.
Someone goes, I'm not doing great actually.
Oh, fuck off. I don't want to listen to that shit. Yeah. Just tell me you're all right and Let's have a drink. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you've had these coma dreams, right? And then you've woken up on the 2nd, which was 1 year ago today.
Today. Yeah, and when I wanted to tell the story today because of the poignance. I wanted to use this as an opportunity to once again thank my beautiful wife for saving my life by telling me to go and see a doctor.
Yeah.
The doctor,
I bet she brings that up all the time.
You know what? She says, so, there's a mate of mine, Luke Cook, he runs this thing called Cup of TV, and during Men's Health Week last year, we did a session not dissimilar to this, but it was video, and I said, my wife said I had to go and see the doctor. She goes, oh, so she nagged you. And I said, I'd like to think that she encouraged me. Yeah. and she is not the sort of person who nags. So when she said go and see the doctor, I thought, well, I'll do the right thing. But if it wasn't for her, I think on the 2nd of January, I woke and said, I need to speak to Claire. I need to tell her that I'm okay. And I looked down and my wedding ring was gone, watch was gone, phone was gone. And so I had to rely on them to bring the phone. And there's a photo of me, tubes up my nose, and it's on her computer screen because after the first phone call that I can recall, the next thing was this video monitor stuck in front of me, a bit of an iPad, and she's at the other end with tears streaming down her cheek because that's the first real contact she had heard from me in basically 2.5 weeks.
Wow.
And so to have that, as I said, today was important, but it's also important because it's at this time of year. I don't know if you saw how many people drowned this year, but around Australia, about 10 have died over the Christmas break. There's been 2 young girls killed by a tree falling on them in Queensland, and it's one of the morbid things that happens after you become an organ recipient is you actually look at where the people are that could actually save other people's lives. So there was a young motorcycle racer who crashed his bike and his family kept him alive to save lives. There was Anne Hesh who died in a car accident. She stayed alive. The hospital kept her alive at her family's wishes so she could save lives.
What does that mean to keep someone alive to save lives?
If somebody dies in an emergency department or an ICU where they're on life support, the declaration of death is actually a very involved process where they have to prove that there's no brain activity and there's no likelihood that if the machines that are keeping the person alive are turned off, that they'll survive. So once the doctors can show the family that death has occurred, the family then are asked whether they'll consent to the machines being left on long enough for recipients to be identified and then the organs retrieved and used to save other people's lives.
So
means
it's a
they've got to keep
process
them
of
alive.
keeping the body, the deceased person's body alive to keep the organs fresher?
Yeah, it is. Because in Australia, to become an organ donor, you've got to be as unlucky as the person who receives the organ is lucky. You have to die in an ICU or an emergency department where they can keep you alive. And there's about 80,000 people who die every year.
So if I die in a car crash and I'm just dead on the road, my organs are no good. Is that what you're saying?
Your soft organs, so your heart, your liver, your lungs, your spleen, your kidneys, no good. Your skin, your bone, some of your tendons can be used. But for the life-saving transplants, the organs, the vital organs, you have to be in that scenario of on a life support machine.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and I think that's what freaks a lot of people out because, as I said, there's a heap of work that I'm doing in the background on advocacy, which is trying to change the laws, which say that at the moment it doesn't matter whether you register as a donor. The family are the people who get to say yes or no.
Yeah.
So even if, and the government spend millions of dollars a year to try and get people just to sign a register because they can use that as a way of saying, look how good we are. We're getting all of these Australians to say I want to be an organ donor. But the reality is in New South Wales, only 54% of families say yes, which means that there's 46% of people who die in that most peculiar of ways on life support or in an emergency department whose organs just get,
Why do you think families say no?
because of just a lack of understanding as to what it can actually mean to say that
And that's despite the fact that they may be registered as a donor.
themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're registered as a donor. Then the doctors say to the family, "Do you consent?" And they say no.
And it's because, like anything, if until 2012 you could get your license, tick a box, and then after 2012, because the federal government said we're going to have a national register, and all the states except for South Australia stopped registration of donors via the licenses, and all of the states went from around 70-75% of people donating their organs to 50% of the people who died in that way donating their organs. South Australia still sits around 73 because they keep it on the driver's license, and it means that there's conversations that happen amongst families. Because in your moment of grief, if your loved one is in an accident, maybe they're swimming and they hit their head, or they're in a car accident and they get couriered to hospital in an ambulance, but their moral journeys come to an end, you're going to be asked by a team of compassionate individuals, very highly trained, your loved one's journey has come to an end. It's over. Their organs can save other people's lives. Will you say yes? And if that's the first time you've heard of that concept, your emotions are going to kick in before your logic does.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
In one moment, when your emotions are running high, you've just lost a loved one.
Yeah.
And if you've never thought about this stuff before, yeah, okay.
And it's not as if you've had, in most cases, you don't get a few weeks or days to think about this. If someone is in an accident and they're dead on life support, you probably only saw them a couple of hours ago or maybe yesterday, or like just the reality that their life has come to an end. Like we all handle death differently. And there's a question of, would you rather die 6 weeks from being told when you're going to die, or would you rather just die? And there's different thoughts about being able to tick off your bucket list, say goodbye to the people you love, all that sort of stuff. And then there's also I'd rather not know about it. And I think it was Woody Allen or one of these,
Well, you had that, but it was 6 months, right?
Yeah. And you do. Well, actually, Andrew, you don't. The denial is the thing. If I had any regret, which I don't have regrets, but if there was ever anything I could call a regret, I didn't tell my mum that I was sick. So I was FaceTiming her one day after I had my diagnosis, and she said, "Why do you look so tired?" I said, "Oh, I've been working hard and travelling." And she said, "No, I think there's something wrong with me." I said, "Mum, there's nothing wrong with me." And then when I got sick in December and went into a coma, I didn't ring her at Christmas. I didn't ring her for New Year because I was in my coma.
Yeah.
My birthday's the 6th of January, so Friday's my birthday, and she tried to ring on my birthday and couldn't get hold of me. And then
Did your wife tell her?
No, because we didn't tell anyone.
Yeah.
So her family didn't know, my family didn't know. It was because it happened so quickly and we didn't know what the outcome was going to be, or certainly I didn't. But the rationale that Claire and I had talked about was, if something goes wrong, let's wait and see what happens before we let people know.
Yeah.
And so I rang Mum a few times where I put filters on. I put the faces you can put on. So even when I was sick, I'd put have a chat to her with these faces on.
Like a dog face emoji or something stupid.
Yeah, or bear face, dog face, crazy devil face.
Wow.
Just to try and hide it, right?
You went to extreme lengths.
Yeah. And then I rang her for her birthday, which was the 20th of February, and I'd been, out of hospital now for over a month, and I'd said to Mum, "Do you remember last year when you said I look sick? You were right. I nearly died at Christmas time. Catastrophic liver failure, catastrophic kidney failure. Last year I had 4 stents put into heart surgeries." And
was she annoyed that you didn't tell her?
She hung up.
Yeah.
Her response was, she hung up, and then she called back and said, "Bloody hell, you could have died and I wouldn't have known. Why didn't your wife tell me?" And I said, "Well, because we didn't want to worry you." And I think in hindsight, it was the right decision. So as I said, when I started telling that story, I don't have any regrets, but I probably would have handled the situation a little bit differently and told her that, I might not see her next year.
Do you think in that period when you knew that you were sick and you were waiting to find an organ donor. Do you think it affected your outlook at all on life? Do you think you became more appreciative of the small things? Was there, or were you still in denial at that space?
Yeah, denial's a big thing.
Yeah,
and also too the altruistic. He became a better bloke. There's a great ad, and it talks about this bloke who kicks little dogs and swears at people and road rage and all that sort of stuff. And then he has a aneurysm in a diner, and in that moment he becomes a hero because he was an organ donor. So they say you can live your whole life as an arsehole and then become an organ donor and you're die a hero. But when you get your life saved, it would be nice to think that you do take on a more altruistic view of life. My relationship with my son for a period from about when he was 17 to when I got sick, 3 years, and it coincided with the business failure and stuff like that, went south. It gave me an opportunity to start rebuilding that.
Yep.
I think you do now that I'd always, as I said, sun comes up, sun goes down, wanted to see as many of those as I could. When I got told that you might not see that many, it just made me a little bit more determined to get better. And I'd like to think that now I spend my time where I used to work 60, 70 hours a week, fairly successful business executive through corporations, all that sort of stuff, ran my own business, the Atlassian billionaire stories. Now I pro bono all of my time to changing laws across Australia. So, as I said, first thing I did when I got out of hospital, swing the golf club, and then started writing to politicians. And I've written...
So let's talk about that from waking up. So, I mean, what does it feel like to wake up from a coma? Do you have any real sense of how long you were out for?
You've got no idea.
Yeah.
In actual fact, the first thing I wanted to do was talk to my wife. The second thing I wanted to find out was where my wedding ring was, because it was gone. I thought someone had stolen it.
Yeah.
And then it's the realization that you were told you were going to die, and you're looking down and you can just see 40 staples that run from the top of your chest to the side where your kidneys would be, and there's this huge scar with staples in. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm alive, and I actually don't feel too bad. Like, there was no pain. In my whole experience, I have to say, it's fucking imposter. No pain.
Yeah.
No discomfort.
Other than the fact that you were dying.
But even then, it was the frog in boiling water, Andrew.
Yeah.
I didn't think I was dying. The morning of going into a coma, I was watching a Kookaburra documentary and thinking life is wonderful. And it's only when my wife came home from filling the car up with petrol that she said, "Are you okay?" Because I was standing in the front door naked, and I said, "I can't put my shoes on." She said,
"Forget about your shoes. Where did you put your pants?"
Yeah. I wish you could put your shoes on, because that way you'd have your pants on. So, a really nice journalist, a guy called David Southwell, contacted me about a different matter, and we were talking about that. And I made this blasé comment. I'd been on hold for about 6 hours with Qantas trying to fix a problem. And this woman said to me, "Mr. Manning, I don't think you've got the patience to just wait us out." And I said, "I've been in a coma for 14 days. This is a walk in the park." And I said that to David, and he said, I want to tell your story. So he and I spent hours talking about this, and then he wrote an article, and the headlines was, "Naked and Delirious." That's how Claire found her husband.
Yeah.
I was like, fuck, I thought I was trying to tell this really nice story, and fucking naked, and it was the Daily Mail.
Of course. I mean, they don't care
and
about
delirious.
They don't care about the genuine part of the story.
But
they care about
no, to be honest, it was a really well written piece, and it that photo went as part of it, and the whole story of the importance. But yeah, the headline, "Naked and Delirious."
Yeah, they just try and grab you.
That pretty much was summed up my 2021, and as I said, imposter, because got sick quickly, got better quickly, but now use my time altruistically to change laws. So,
and you were saying just before we were recording, that when you were still in the hospital before you got out, once you'd woken up from the coma, you wanted to write some goals on the whiteboard, right?
Yeah.
And
So in the waking up, I'll get to the whiteboard story, but I want to. There was a nurse called Lara who only identified herself just before I left hospital as the nurse who I did this to. So they would feed me, and so on my birthday they were feeding me cupcakes that my wife had bought, and she was also trying to feed me hospital food, and there was pumpkin in it, and every time she put the pumpkin in my mouth, I spat it at her.
Yeah,
and she said, "What are you doing that for?" I said, "To be funny."
What? Yeah.
And all I could, so I was,
Can you remember that?
yeah. I remember spitting the food at her and telling her I was trying to be funny because I thought it was. But that's my sense of humour, which is obviously the connection you and I have, but not our sense of humour, but comedy.
Yeah.
Your sense of humour is probably normal. But
spitting pumpkin is a great man in the hospital. Come on,
yeah,
mate.
yeah. As I said, that's my sense of humour. So there was a whiteboard, and I'd said to my wife, "What do I have to do to get out of here?" I wanted to watch the ping ball test in Hobart, and she said, "Do whatever the doctors tell you to." So I said to one of the nurses, "Can I get a pen to write on the whiteboard? Because I want to put some goals up." And so she handed me the pen, and I went up to the whiteboard and I wrote 15th of January, getting out of here, and then started to number the points I was going to make. And I've looked at my hand and realised it was my left hand that I was writing with. And I've been a right-hander since I was a kid. So I don't understand why I picked the pen up to write with my left hand.
Yeah, and so I mean that would freak me out thinking, oh God, was the person whose liver I've got inside me left-handed? Like, is that is that what's happening here? Like,
well,
I
reckon there must be something to it because, as I said when we were having a bit of a side chat, there's a Simpsons episode where Snake dies and Homer becomes a felon because he had the hair transplant from Snake.
Yeah.
And I also, in my advocacy and charity work, I work with a group called Life Bulb out of the US, and they work with Donate Life in the US. And there's a chapter of Donate Life called Donate Life Hollywood, and their job is to work with people like Grey's Anatomy and other medical shows where they're going to include organ and tissue transplants into their stories to try and dispel myths. And one of the big conversations we had only a couple of weeks ago was whether or not people take on the traits of the organs that they receive. And there's no scientific study that's been done to work out whether it happens or not, but whether it's writing with my left hand or just trying to be a nicer person or whatever. Maybe there's something to it.
Have you ever had curiosity in trying to find out more about the donor? I mean, I imagine there's a whole bunch of confidentiality stuff there.
Yeah, and that's part of the work that I'm doing is trying to help donor families, because the donor families are the one who suffer the grief. Donor recipients, we're the lucky ones.
Yeah.
As I said, someone whose mortal journey has to come to an end and their family get asked, will you consent to organ and tissue donation to save other lives? In New South Wales, 54% of families say yes, 46% say no. I want that number who say no to come zero. And any family who is asked, I would love for them to give the gift of life. I think when it came to my situation, I don't want to impose myself on that family because I figure they've suffered enough. What I've done is made my story public, and I tell my story openly, much to the chagrin and dislike of people like the Organ and Tissue Authority, because they say they have to then deal with the confidentiality side of things. I've got no problems with that donor family. If they want to reach out to me and find out if that organ that their loved one gave me is doing good, then they can.
Is that something which can happen at the moment?
No.
Yeah, okay.
The connection between donor families and donor recipients is a difficult one to navigate because of the confidentiality.
Yeah. So, I mean, is that where something in the future possibly there could be some kind of opt-in process where if both parties opted in, then there could be a communication pathway?
That does exist now. So, and that's what I'm saying. So, as a recipient, I don't think it's a recipient's right or place in the world to reach out to the donor family other than to say thank you. And we do that anonymously. So after I got my pen to write on the board, I actually wrote the letter to the family while I was in hospital and thanked them for making that decision, because it must have been tough with COVID in place because they weren't able to have the face-to-face conversation about it with doctors and nurses. So I know that it was a miraculous situation. What I'd love, if one day they reached out to me, I would gladly give my time to them, because the gift they've given me is immeasurable. What I would say is I will never impose myself on their lives.
Yep.
But if they want to find out, they can. But I hope by being as open and passionate about the advocacy, I sign off my emails when I do all the stuff I do as Rob Manning, forever grateful recipient and passionate organ and tissue donation and transplant awareness advocate.
Yep.
And that's worked really well because whether it's Dr. David Gillespie, who was the former minister, whether it's Jed Carney, who's the current minister, federal MPs like Emma McBride, Gordon Reid, and Ann Webster, Mike Freelander, Mark Butler, Health Minister. In New South Wales, people like David Meehan, Adam Crouch, Victor Dominello, they've all listened to my story. And in New South Wales, we set up the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Organ and Tissue Donation and Transplant Awareness. In Western Australia, we've got the laws changed. In South Australia, I've got the laws changed. In ACT, they're ahead of the game, and there's a lady there by the name of Tara Chain who works really well to try and get donor families looked after and donor recipients looked after. And if you can bring them together in a safe way, because there's horror stories of people finding out that, you know, their loved one's organs went to somebody who has a different sexual persuasion to what they believe in, or a different colour to what they believe in, or a different political persuasion.
Yeah,
or there's the horror stories of a man who pursued a young lady because she ended up with his wife's heart, and he believed that his wife had gifted him her heart. So when the heart went to somebody else, he became a stalker.
That's creepy. Yeah.
So there's those sort of things that.
Okay, yeah, I hadn't imagined.
There's the beautiful Hallmark story where everyone gets together and celebrates Christmas, but then there's horror stories.
Wow.
And there's horror stories where there's one young family who their young child received a kidney transplant, and they were getting asked by the nurses to write a thank you letter to the family who had donated the organ. And then while she was writing the letter, her son went into cardiac arrest, and then they saved him, but they had to replace the kidney. So then she had to work out, does she continue to write the letter to the first kidney's family or the second kidney's family, or to both? And so the trauma is so, and the other parts of those stories, Andrew, is that you get the secondary grief. So not every organ transplant works out as well as mine has.
So the body rejects it or something.
Yeah,
right?
and I'll be on rejection medication for the rest of my life. Will never drink again. Can't eat McDonald's soft serve. Can't have even a McDonald's sundae is out of the question because of listeria, I think they call it, food poisoning. Because my immune system, cancer chances increase.
I mean, I'd find the booze harder than the soft serve, but, you know, it's still annoying.
Well,
more
the hardest thing about giving up the booze is every month I get a call from my counsellor, Kathy, from Drug and Alcohol, and she says, so, Rob, have you had any temptation to go back to the booze? And it's like, I didn't have a problem, I didn't think.
Yeah.
I don't ever think I was an alcoholic. Maybe a highly functioning alcoholic, but I never saw myself as an alcoholic. But for the foreseeable future, I'll get a monthly phone call from Kathy, just checking. That's hard.
Yeah.
Because I actually went and got my RSA and have served behind the bar at the Killarney Vale Football Club for the 2021 season in which they won the grand final. And I spent on grand final day 12 hours behind the bar serving some very intoxicating. Well, no, responsible service of alcohol. We didn't ever breach RSA.
But you're around it, but you can't have it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you feel now compared to how you were feeling? Do you feel?
Yeah, well, as I said, frog in boiling water. Never thought I was sick.
Yeah.
But at age 55, I now hold the record for the oldest debuting rookie for the Killarney Vale Reserves in the Hunter Newcastle Black Diamond League. So I played 5 games of AFL at 55. I feel better now than I did when I was 25 or 30.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, look.
That's a cool feeling, right?
It is. And, coming back to the core of what this show's about, it's when shit's gone sideways, how do you get out of it? And I'm going to go back to some very simple philosophies that I live life by, and that is, if it is to be, it's up to me. The only person who could have got me out of hospital on the 15th of January was me. And that was 2 or 3 weeks ahead of what was scheduled. And the other one is sun comes up, sun goes down. See as many as you can.
Do you find you were in denial before the surgery, right? But now, 1 year on, do you find that your outlook on life has changed at all? Do you find that food tastes better, or that you just value human connections more? Is there anything of that
definitely,
you just find that you've
definitely
changed?
Human connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in addition to all the advocacy work I do, I make sure that the friendships that, whether they're next door or around the world, I stay in touch with people more often. As I said, the altruistic side of things, I'd like to think I'm a better human being now than I was before.
Yep.
Because I know how precious life is, and I know the miracle that I was afforded. As I said once earlier, I had to have everything go miraculously right because of how catastrophically everything had gone.
Yeah.
And so someone was looking after me.
What do you think can be done to change that rate of? You said it was almost half of families say no when they're asked whether to donate organs.
And it's not because families are not generous or not giving or caring. It's because in the situation that they find themselves in,
They're being put on the spot, right?
And emotion will kick in every time. I've had a chat to psychologists. I actually started studying psychology myself since coming out of hospital. And the reality is, in any traumatic situation, the human condition will always use emotion before logic. And so the only way you can counter that, it's why every professional sportsman, or when you talk to military, it's all about prior preparation prevents poor performance.
Yeah.
You have to discuss the scenario, hoping that you never have to be in that scenario to understand how you'd react. So I'd rather see everyone have a conversation around a barbecue, the kitchen table, sitting around having a chat with mates at the pub, and go, if you were ever put on the spot where one of your loved ones' journey had come to an end and you were asked, will you allow their organs to be used to save other lives?
Yep.
Would you say yes? And if you were that person who was lying there, would you want your family to say yes? And if you have that conversation, I'll guarantee you, Andrew, if there's nothing else you remember from today, if I told you when I die, I still want to be an organ donor, you'll remember that for the rest of your life. But if you ask me to remember what you were drinking right now, that soft drink, I couldn't tell you what it is.
Yep.
Because it's not important. But something like that, when there's no pressure, there's no...
So how do you increase those conversations? Is it... it sounds like something that needs a PR campaign for, like, there to be, there's Are You OK Day, because there's just a day where people are reminded to have that conversation. Is there something like that exists, or is there a group that should be spearheading this stuff?
There is a group called the Organ and Tissue Authority of Australia, set up in 2009, who take responsibility for this, and they're all about registration of people for organ and tissue donation. So they'll spend $5 million to say that we're going to get 100,000 people to register to become organ donors, and then they'll hit 60,000 and brag about it.
But you're saying that is missing the point, because when it gets to the real problem
Is
is that
consent.
families are asked and they say no because there hasn't been a conversation. It's got
That's
nothing
right.
to do with the registration.
So part of the conversation with Dad was it's got to be legislation, education, and communication. So the legislation has to change.
Registration with conversation with who? Sorry.
So, or with Dad in the coma.
Oh,
so the,
yes,
the
yeah.
coma convert. Yeah, the dream, the coma,
Yeah.
the lecture.
The-
Legislation has to change. So we've got to change the way in which donor families are treated. So donor families need to be able to celebrate the fact that their loved one was an organ donor. And in 3 states or 2 states in a territory, it was illegal for donor families to say, I'll use my name, Rob was a donor and he saved 7 people's lives, because that made it possible then for people to work out whose organ they got. So I worked with the West Australian government, Amber Jades Sanderson, and one of her advisors, and we got a letter issued to say that there was no public interest in prosecution in South Australia. Worked with Nicola Sanafanti, and we introduced legislation to enable families to recognise their loved ones without fear of prosecution under the Human Tissue Act. So it's important that families can celebrate their loved ones. So that needed to change, and that is being done.
So they can say, my brother saved 7 lives, and they can say that and
Openly now.
Openly.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's important that happen. As I said, from a recipient's point of view, I don't want to impose myself further on that family who saved my life. But if they ever want to come and see whether their decision was a good one, I want to show them that it is, and it was. It's the one thing that family can look to and know that their loved one's decision, whether it was they were a registered donor or not, but that family who made the decision to save my life, I want, if they ever find out who I am and that it was their loved one who saved me, that something really good came from it. And I think it already has. I think in October this year, we launched the New South Wales Parliamentary Friends of Organ and Tissue Donation and Transplant Awareness. And on the 19th of November, they introduced a tile onto the Service New South Wales app for 5.2 million New South Wales people to register to become donors. What it did, it doesn't replace licences, because when they took it off driver's licences, the conversation stopped. What we have to do is have more conversations when there's no pressure, no critical time pressure as far as having to make a decision, so that when and if someone is ever put on the spot, their first instinct, their first emotional reaction is, yes, I want my loved one to have saved another life.
Do you think that there's a feeling of some kind of, I don't know, maybe not burden or responsibility when you've been a recipient of an organ transplant to live a fulfilling life, to I guess, be appreciative for the fortunate luck that you've had?
For me personally, yes.
Yeah.
I have talked to people who said, I don't understand what the big deal is. I got sick, I got better. That person was going to die anyway.
Oh, wow.
So there are some people out there who,
yeah.
who just go, yeah, that's just the way it happens.
That's pretty cold-hearted.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
almost matter of fact. But the reality is, someone made a decision to save my life, and for that, I'm eternally grateful.
Yeah.
And as a result, I want to make a difference. And coming to talk to you today is part of that. And it's not something that I'm going to do for a year or 2 years. It's something I'll do for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate in a lot of ways. Being alive is the most fortunate thing, but being able to then give my time without having to worry about going out and working full time or worrying about, can I upset people? Because on my social media, I call myself the forever grateful recipient, but I also call myself a tree shaker and a chain rattler. And I know I've upset the Minister of Organ and Tissue in Jed Carney because I said 60,000 is an admirable number to hit, but you did start out by saying you're going to hit 100. So I wouldn't be bragging about 60% achievement to your goal.
Well, I think the bigger conversation seems to be the point you've already made, which is that is of limited value when the families at the end are the ones
who have to say yes.
that have to ultimately decide.
There was a subtle change in the Organ and Tissue Authority's messaging after I started shaking the trees and rattling the chains, and they have now started to introduce words like, and tell your family. So register, it only takes a minute, and then you'll start to see this little tagline, and talk to your family.
I mean, that's great for it to be secondary messaging, but it needs
It's got to be
it needs
primary.
to be first.
Yeah.
It needs to be like, have the conversation today.
Exactly, because we're a nation of lazy, good-hearted people, right? So if you ask most Australians, I'd say, yeah, of course I'm going to donate my organs.
Yep.
Are you registered? No, haven't got time. Wasn't on my license when I got my license renewed. Yep. And so they don't know that they've got to go to www.donatelife.com/register and then fill in all the details. Have the Medicare card ready. And it's like, fuck, why make it so hard?
I just use a digital license these days on my phone, right? Which, I mean, I don't even know if I had an accident, they can't even get into my phone. Is it still some way of them to look up to see that I'm registered as an organ donor?
Only on the National Register. But once again, the national registration, there's a thing called Goodhart's Law. And there was a bloke called Goodhart who said, if you make a measure, a goal, you've made the measure ineffective. And as soon as they made their goal, the number of people who are registered, it became ineffective.
What are you showing me here?
I'm showing you my organ and tissue donation registration card issued by Donate Life.
Okay.
And it says that I'm on the National Register. So when you're in hospital in an emergency care situation or an end-of-life situation, the doctors will go to a national database and see if you're a registered donor. And all that does, Andrew, is make the conversation that they're about to have with your family one step easier. Because they can say, Andrew, as you know, Rob's lying here. He's been hit by a car and his life has come to an end. He is a registered organ donor. Do you consent to his wishes as being an organ donor?
Yep.
So that's an easy part because they can say Rob wanted to be an organ donor because they've got access to the registration.
Yep. But if it's the first time that a family has ever had to think about any of this stuff and they're being hit with a semi-trailer and suddenly their logic's not kicking in, then
that's right.
That information could just mean fuck all.
And that's why it's so important that we get the clinical processes right. So the conversation that the doctors and nurses have with the families. The nurses do an excellent job. If nurses are involved in the first conversation with families, it's like 90% of families say yes. If the doctor's the first one, it's like 40% or less.
What is that about? Why?
A lot of it's got to do with human compassion. It's how you broach the subject. And as I said, registered donorship makes it easier for that conversation to happen. Rob was a registered donor. Do you want to honour Rob's wishes?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course I want to do what Rob wanted to do. That's how most of us would think, even emotionally. But if you have to say he hadn't said one way or the other and you've never had that conversation, it's going to be no.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if that's what he wanted.
But
if we tell someone what we want...
And so what, the doctors are just so matter-of-fact and non-personable. They're just coming in and just putting it all on the table and getting a...
Some must be.
Yeah. I mean...
I had a chat to a guy called Dr. Gordon Reed, who was an emergency physician based out of Gosford. He's now a federal politician, and he said he'd been involved in these discussions and he'd had success. So some doctors are obviously well-skilled and have that bedside manner, but some
nurses have a much higher strike rate.
Yeah, and that's because the government had focused on teaching the nurses how to have that conversation. So I think there's got to be a focus on getting that conversation happening away from the doctors and nurses and having it around. So I'll go back to the three things. It was legislation, so change the law, education and communication. So you said about a PR exercise. So if we changed the education so that Healthy Harold, who goes into the primary schools, talked about something like Zadie's chasing rainbows. And Zadie was a young girl in Victoria about 15 years ago who had someone in her class, their parent became a recipient. And so they talked about organ donation. And Zadie went home and spoke to her dad, Alan, and said, Dad, if anything ever happens to me, I would like to think that I could help save someone's lives. And about 6 or 8 weeks after that happened, Zadie complained of a headache and she was having a brain aneurysm, which her family didn't know until she was in hospital, and Zadie passed away, and the family made the decision to donate Zadie's organs, and she saved 9 people's lives.
Mm.
And it was because Zadie had been exposed to it and spoken to her parents about it, that her parents, even in that depth of despair and what immeasurable grief, were able to say that's what Zadie wanted, that they're able to do that. So Alan now campaigns for educating kids.
Because it must feel good to be part of that conversation, be like, we're actually respecting her wishes.
Yeah.
Right? And yeah.
And so if you never get around to registering to be a donor,
Mm.
just tell someone who you love that if you ever die,
Yeah.
in the most peculiar of circumstances, you're on life support and your journey comes to an end, you'd want them to say yes.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get things like a hashtag up for Eskies for transplant, because every organ and tissue donation or transplant relies upon the safe transfer of a vital organ from one place to another.
Yep.
And you'll see in movies and on TV when they talk about it,
Yeah.
little red and white Eskies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So-
on ice. Organ on ice.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I want is for everyone to use the hashtag Eskies for transplants and take a photo of their favourite drink on ice and just share it. I'd love for someone like Esky or Coolman or Willow or one of those brands to get on board. I'd love for a brewery to get on board, right? Because everyone who goes to a party this time of year is throwing their beers into an Esky or into a bathtub on ice, and you know what greater social event than sitting around the Esky saying, you know, if I ever needed one, I'd love to get a transplant. And if I'm ever in a situation where you can use
Forget
bits
about
of
the
me-
beers, put my liver in an esky,
Exactly.
take it to the hospital. There might be someone like Rob that needs it. Yeah.
Yeah. and that's the thing. You don't know. I can guarantee you, if you'd spoken to me in January of 2021, so just 2 years ago, I didn't need an organ.
Yeah. These are conversations
It
you've
just
never
popped up.
had. This is an entire world that you knew nothing about, but now it's something which is so close to your heart.
Yeah,
That must-
and for me, when shit went sideways, I used if it is to be, it is up to me to get out of it, and my desire to see as many sunrises in the east, sunsets in the west as I can, and then decided that I had to honour what my dad had told me, and that was make a difference. Go out and talk to people about just if you think, whether you've had a drink or not, just say if you're ever asked, would you say yes to me being an organ donor? I want you to say yes. So that the other hashtag is just ask them to say yes. So hashtag Eskies for transplant, and then just.
Well, it sounds like the requests from your dad during your coma dream have come to reality. You know, you're following through with the agreement you made during that dream.
Well, he was a man I loved and a man who I respected and looked up to, and he's one of the reasons why in anything that I've encountered in life where things go bad, you can always find a way out. And I think what really appealed to me about having a chat to you, Andrew, was you can have the best of opportunities and shit goes wrong, and how you get out of that shit is what makes you a better person.
Absolutely.
And I'm sitting here today talking to you, hoping that, you know, when we battle off on the 31st of January, that you don't take your journey in the Royal competition one step further than... No, I wish you all the best, actually.
Likewise. It'll be fun.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Rob, I think we've covered it off. I think that was a great story. Thanks so much for coming on Shit's Gone Sideways and sharing.
I'm just glad you started this podcast a little while ago, and so pleased to be a part of it, Andrew.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Been another episode of Shit's Gone Sideways.
Shit's Gone Sideways.